Hi, welcome to Educator. This is Teacher Jeff. I'm an educator and an engineer by profession. And today we will discuss Chapter 2. And Chapter 2 is all about supply chains as a system. And in today's lesson, there are two key areas that I'm going to be discussing today. First, we have supply chain system, and second, we have characteristics of supply chain. Now, in order for us to get started, let us first discuss our first key area, which is supply chain systems. As you can recall, in chapter 1, we described the evolution of supply chains and their importance in today's business environment, correct? Now, in this chapter, we describe the basic components of supply chains and how they fit together to form the supply chain system. Now, take note that supply chain management is the design, planning, execution, control, and monitoring of supply chain activities with the objective of creating net value, building a competitive infrastructure, leveraging worldwide logistics, synchronizing supply with demand, and measuring performance globally. Now, viewed another way, it is actually the result of a series of coordinated steps necessary to transform raw materials into finished products and services that the consumer needs or wants. A company manages a series of business processes in order to transform inputs or raw materials into outputs or finished goods that have value to a customer. For example, customers value a pan of cornbread higher than a bag of unprocessed cornmeal. Another example, a well-furnished apartment costs more than a non-furnished one to a tenant. Now, in the context of supply chain management, the inputs consist of things and people, and the outputs are goods or services consumed by customers in manufacturing or service businesses. Now, the ITO model or inputs, transformation or outputs, which is also called as IPO model or inputs, process, outputs, it is the DNA of the supply chain. Now, being the DNA of the supply chain, both manufacturing and service businesses employ the ITO or IPO model to create a systematic, functioning supply chain to sustain and become competitive. Now, as you can see in figure 2.1, it presents the basic ITO model or inputs, transformation, and outputs. Now, in this chapter, we describe the major business processes and how to employ these processes to transform inputs into outputs. Resources are consumed during the transformation process, and companies must manage these resources wisely in order to improve their supply chain systems. Now, these resources include employees, equipment, facilities, inventory, systems, and supply chain partners as well. And all of these resources require periodic replenishment and upgrading to maintain a competitive edge for the supply chain. Now, the role of the customer is very important since a customer's perceived value determines the actual value of the outputs. Now, we know for a fact that all products and services evolve through a life cycle, correct? Now, that being said, managerial challenges exist at each stage of the product life cycle. Therefore, internal and external customers are involved through the product life cycle. So, what do internal and external customers specifically do to contribute to the overall supply chain process then? Well, internal customers transform the received inputs into valuable outputs. Now, take note, just a brief recap. If we say internal customers, these are people working inside the organization. So, in other words, these refer to the employees. And take note, they are responsible in transforming raw materials into finished products. On the other hand, If we see external customers, they exchange financial resources for the goods and services they order. So, in short, external customers refer to people outside the organization. So, they are the ones who buy our products and consume our finished goods. And all customers are recipients of goods and services as well as evaluators of product received. Therefore, customers' knowledge about a product can influence their product preference. Incorporating a customer's preference into the development of a product can help a company develop marketable new products faster with a higher success rate. Now, a holistic view of supply chain systems can provide insights on how supply chain participants operate independently and collectively toward achieving a real time global supply chain. Now, as you can see on the sample figure, this is our ITO model or inputs, transformation, outputs model. It is a concept that is applicable not only to supply chain management, but also to other systems. Now, it can assist in understanding the complexity of supply chain systems. In fact, Bertalanffy 1969 first proposed the general systems theory, which states that it asserts that a real system continuously evolves by interacting with external environments and integrating new properties into the system. A holistic perspective of viewing the continually evolving process of a system is actually essential to understand how system parts function both independently and collectively toward a common goal. Now, other disciplines, including physics, biology, information systems, technology, and sociology, have grounded their works on the general systems theory. Thus, in general, the ITO model organizes a supply chain system in a sequence of inputs, transformation, and outputs. These three components vary with industry sectors. Supply chain systems can be constructed for both the manufacturing and the service sectors. Now, in order for us to better understand the ITO model, let us discuss first its first element, which is inputs. Now, as you can see, the inputs for a manufacturing process usually include raw materials such as wood, steel, water, plastic, chemicals, etc. All right. And production processes such as carving wood, processing steel, and blending chemicals begin after raw materials arrive, correct? Now, the output of the production process includes finished goods such as furniture, toys, or automobiles. Now, in contrary, inputs for service sectors include people such as patients, travelers, and vacationers to satisfy customer demand for services such as medical care, in-flight services, and recreational entertainment. Now, hospitals, airlines, and vacation destinations offer services to satisfy customers' needs. And after receiving these services offered, these same people are now the outputs. For example, patients recover from illness, travelers arrive at a destination, and vacationers have a great recreational experience. Now, the basic ITO model is applicable to a general understanding of supply chain systems for both manufacturing and service sectors. A closer look at the operations of both sectors indicate that differences do exist in all three essential elements. In fact, manufacturing inputs are things, whereas service inputs are primarily people. The manufacturing process is tangible and standardized, whereas service processes are often intangible and vary greatly among service providers. Now, in order for us to better understand this, let me give you an example. For example, it is easier to see how a table is built than to learn how to please a customer at a restaurant. Now, in this example, we can tell that measuring outputs of manufacturing sectors is often easier than measuring outputs of a service sector, right? A finished good needs to meet particular product specifications and can be measured consistently. A group of tourists can have divergent experiences after using the same customer service at the same tourism destination. Therefore, a higher degree of variations exists in the output of service sectors than in the output of the manufacturing sector. Now, the second element of the ITO model is what we call transformation process. Now, much of the research in management has focused on the transformation process itself. Therefore, the transformation process in manufacturing is usually obvious because it involves physical change in the product. Now, as you can see, some of the variables in transformation of services are tangible and intangible. Now, what's the difference between the two? If we say tangible variable, examples of this are determining the number of store sites for a retail business. An example of intangible variable that would be a caregiver's attention to a patient or the level of judgment required by a bouquet arranger in a custom flower shop. So what do we mean by transformation process then? If we say transformation process, it can be viewed as a technical function capable of standardizing or customizing the product. Now here, companies adapt the transformation process to any of the variations that may be encountered in the operating environment. For example, the service transformation can be rigid, the use of ATMs or automated teller machines, or flexible, providing human bank tellers. Now, automation is the substitution of technology for people. It is an example of the active use of technology in providing services. So, in other words, if you automate your processes, it means to say that you mechanize your processes in your company. And if we say automation, take note that machineries and equipment are usually the things that are commonly used by the companies in physically transforming raw materials into finished goods, correct? And so, for that matter, automation usually increases over time as the service becomes more standardized, as in the case of travel insurance policies sold through vending machines. Now, the amount of automation also increases as the technology capability increases as well, such as in airline reservation systems now available to every travel agent and online flight selection for the internet user. Now, this service can be called continuous and discrete. So, what's the difference between the two? Well, the transformation process must be adaptable to variations in tasks and rates of service. Now, the service can be considered as continuous, such as an electric utility, or discrete, such as a lawyer preparing a house purchase agreement. Now, companies can service customers at their place of business, as in a bakery, in the customer's house, as by an interior decorator, or over a communication system, as in home video shopping channel. Now, the presence of many variables in the transformation process provides a uniqueness and identity on the part of the service provider. And finally, the last element of the ITO model, that would be the outputs. And if we say outputs, they take the form of goods or things which customers can measure and evaluate to see if they conform to specifications. For example, a thin plastic paper is an example of an output that is used to wrap after dinner mints. Now, it must be attractive and meet other physical specifications simultaneously. It provides part of the service package at a restaurant. Measuring the output for a customer may be a complex undertaking, as mentioned earlier, because each customer is unique. Now, the measure of a completed output may be as indefinite as the perception of the customer. For example, Attending a training course on the use of a word processing software package transforms a person with little knowledge to a person with more knowledge. However, the knowledge gained varies with each person because clearly defining the output for a pure service is difficult, and the achievement of a satisfactory output requires variation in the process used. So, an understanding of the expectation of the customer before providing the service may preclude subsequent customer dissatisfaction or rework of the services. Now, as you can see in table 2.1, it shows examples of ITO processes in different industries, both manufacturing and service industries. Now, as you can see, you have there manufacturing and other producing sectors, which include electric utility, building construction, and toy firms. On the other hand, for service sectors, it include restaurant, hotels, hospital emergency room, and public accounting firm. Now, if you can notice, within the manufacturing sector, an electric utility company constructs power plants to maximize its capacity to service residential areas. Now, the high voltage power at the power plant is redistributed as low voltage power for each residential house. Now, in the service sector, food preparation at a restaurant begins with the customer's order, right? And the chef in the kitchen then receives the order and begins cooking the food to order. And the server delivers the food to the customer to eat. Now, when the transformation process is successful, the customer is full and satisfied with the overall food service. Now, in looking at the differences between the two sectors, an interesting phenomenon is developing. In fact, the boundary between manufacturing and services blurs as these two processes become closely related and inseparable in contemporary business practice. All right, so that ends our first key area of our lesson. And moving on to the last key area, which is characteristics of supply chain. So, like I said earlier, supply chains can be structured in different forms to improve business performance in areas such as operational efficiency, agility, lean management, customer satisfaction, inventory levels, and response time to market as well. When business partners operate without seeking to integrate their supply chains, they will not communicate, cooperate, or collaborate with each other. As a result, disruptions to daily operations, such as having excess inventory or back orders, often result. When companies recognize these issues, they can take actions to coordinate with each other. However, before the synergy of partnership is realized, the supply chain must be reconstructed and integrated. Now, a supply chain can change in focus during its lifetime to improve operational performance. Now, in its early stages, supply chain managers seek to improve operational performance by increasing efficiency, improving resource allocation, accurately predicting customer demand, increasing cash flow speed, and eliminating waste. On the other hand, it is to improve strategic business benefits as well. Now, as the supply chain advances in complexity, its focus turns to the improvement of strategic business benefits, such as fostering innovation, achieving competitiveness in information, sustaining market growth, and constructing higher entity or higher entry barriers to potential competitors. On the other hand, once a supply chain is completed and integrated, the supply chain partners need to evaluate how they are performing in terms of its major functions, such as the physical, financial, information flows, and the supply chain relationships. Now, the first three, which is the physical, financial, and information, describe the flows along a supply chain. And the last one, the relational supply chain, describes the linkages between entities that compose the supply chain. In other words, understanding these elements can help a business assess its strengths and weaknesses. A necessary endeavor in strategic analysis and planning. So, from this understanding, the business can increase its ability to perform well in these functions and hence sustain itself and grow. So, in order for us to better understand each of the intrinsic flows of supply chain, let us discuss them one by one, starting with the physical flow or material flow. Physical flow is the actual movement of goods or the delivery of services across the supply chain. So, as you can see, that is an example of a physical flow or material flow. And take note, financial, information, and funds flows play supporting roles to ensure the core supply chain functions smoothly and efficiently from one business partner to another. Therefore, all supply chain partners attempt to optimize the physical flow to ensure that customers receive goods on time and at a reasonable price as well. Now, in order to accomplish these goals, operational costs such as inventory, transportation, and manufacturing need to be optimized. And at the same time, business partners must closely collaborate with each other and streamline the physical flow to reduce waste. Success at moving physical flow can lower costs and increase revenues. So, in order for us to better understand this, let me give you an example. So, for example, manufacturers obtain materials from multiple suppliers at an electronic trading site such as the Alibaba.com in order to lower the purchasing cost. Now, suppliers from Alibaba.com work with the Li and Fang Group, a major trading company in Hong Kong, to minimize logistics costs and ensure the timely delivery of goods to retailers. Now, retailers promote goods to customers in an effective manner so that revenues increase and the quality of customer service also improves. Now, if customers are satisfied with the goods purchased, retailers will then continue to order from manufacturers. Moving physical goods from upstream to downstream supply chain seamlessly is indispensable to sustainability of a supply chain. The next element or intrinsic flow of the supply chain, that would be the information flow. Information flow is when goods move from one location to another. Information requires updating and disseminating to supply chain partners. Now, the absence of information, take note, synchronicity can result in overstocking, back orders, poor decision-making processes, distrust between supply chain partners, and slow responses to market changes as well. As you can see, this is an example of the information flow in the supply chain. Therefore, a smooth flow of information enables the supply chain manager to address common questions that surface in the organization's day-to-day running of the organization. So the supply chain manager would usually ask these questions. When receiving an order, should an organization accept or reject it? Second, should a manufacturer order more raw materials when the inventory reaches the reorder point? Is there enough market demand to justify the volume of an order? And how soon can a retailer promise the delivery of a special order? Now, any supply chain manager would have trouble answering these questions, especially if information were not synchronized and integrated across the supply chain. Another challenge to information flow is the difficulty of synchronizing information across the supply chain. Now, the difficulty derives from the existence of information in both explicit and implicit forms. Now, if we say explicit supply chain information, it includes transactional data, procedures, policies, lessons learned, performance criteria, and revenue reports. So, therefore, explicit supply management information can be created captured, refined, stored, managed, and disseminated in paper-based or digital formats. Moving the explicit information across the supply chain is indispensable to support the flow of goods and funds. And after receiving explicit information, an effective supply chain manager should have the ability to reorganize and transform information into useful knowledge. And second, if we say implicit supply chain information, it includes insights, intuition, corporate values, organizational culture, and supply chain management experience are difficult to document. Implicit information often resides in the minds of information holders, especially the supply chain managers. Therefore, it is a challenge to capture and transfer the implicit information to business partners to improve supply chain effectiveness. And the next intrinsic flow of supply chain, that would be the financial or funds flow. When goods move or services are provided, business partners expect monetary compensation from their customers. In other words, funds need to flow in order to support, as you can see there in our illustration, funds need to flow in order to support the movement of goods and services from their origins to their final delivery to the end user and vice versa. Now, the Center for Strategic Supply Leadership Conference asserts that capital flows are important inside a supply chain. Now, the following points illustrate the importance of funds flow to sustain the operation of a supply chain. First, an internal physical supply chain typically contains more than 70% of organizational assets. Second, an average of 55% of total revenue in a company is spent on purchased materials. Third, maintenance, repair, and operations or MRO activities account for 7% of the total revenue in a company. Fourth, services account for 18% of the total revenue. And finally, a total of 80% of revenue dollars is spent on supply chain activities. Now, all of these costs are direct or indirect costs associated with the movement of products and information. So, as the supply chain extends further, hidden costs, including overstocks, stockouts, defective inventory, and market fluctuations, escalate the total cost of ownership or the TCO. Now, consider Mattel's initiative in recalling toys due to quality control problems with its Chinese supplier. Mattel needed not only to spend money in recalling toys, but most importantly, to save its corporate image and reputation. So, as much as possible, we should be careful. And finally, the last intrinsic flow is called the relation flow. If we say relation flow, supply chain business partners need to both compete and cooperate with each other in order to streamline the flow of goods, capital, and information. For example, Walmart mandated that its top suppliers adopt radio frequency identification or RFID. In return, Walmart shares real-time sales and inventory information with those suppliers, and improvement in delivery and product quality can increase customer purchases over time and result from both collaboration and competition among supply chain partners. And retailers can provide better customer service on site, therefore reducing the number of return goods. And the savings in return goods can be shared between retailers and suppliers without having suppliers solely absorb the return goods. And these examples show a balanced relationship among business partners, thereby providing benefits to all in the supply chain. All right, so that is an example of the commercial or relational flow of supply chain. All right, I think that's a good place to stop. And if you like this video, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell button for the latest updates. Thank you.